Hello, good afternoon. Nice to meet all of you. I'm Rainer from Toshiba, and Toshiba is manufacturing hard disk drives. So I talk a little bit about hard disk drives, but also about all other means of storing data. Before actually going into the presentation, I would like to present to you the latest 20 terabyte hard disk drive. It's first time in public actually. We announced it like 2 weeks ago. It's probably still hot from the factory. 20 terabytes in this box. This is 20 trillion bytes, or 20 million songs of 1 megabyte. Well, previous times no one could believe that we will have it and we will need it. But 20 terabytes today in cloud environment is a simple thing. Let's look back. I mean, 20 terabyte is a kind of even number. It's a kind of anniversary for the hard disk drive. So I searched in our labs and in our archives, and what I found is 20 gigabyte in 2006. So about 20 years ago, we had 1,000 times less capacity. And at that time, 20 gigabyte in this one was already considered as a lot. And even more, another 20 years back, in 1984, oh, that's heavy. We had 20 megabyte in that bulky box. This was more or less the emerge of the hard disk drive as a broad application. Hard disk drive has been existing from the 60s, but you need a truck to carry them. Yeah, this one here, the 20 megabyte, one of the older ones like me, started their career. They were the first hard disk drive used in PCs, basically. So, 40 years, a million times. Thinking about that, in another 20 years, yeah, that's no time for downtime 2042. Will we have a 20 exabyte? No, will we have a 20 petabyte? So 20 petabyte is now about 3 or 4 racks. In 20 years, will we have integrated the storage of 3 or 4 racks in one of these hard disk drives? If development would just continue and not even accelerate, we will have. And Mihaela, please take a note. In 20 years, for no time for downtime, 2042. I'm middle 70, I will be retired. But let's keep in touch, and if you invite me as a guest speaker, not for Toshiba, to this event, we can review. So another 20 years in the future. I mean, this is 40 years back. 40 years in the future. In no time for downtime, 2062. Will we have a 20 exabyte hard disk drive? 20 exabyte today is 5 or 6 data center halls. No one can imagine. Technology is not there. I cannot imagine. But in 2062, I'm 95. And again, if there's a no time for downtime in 2062, we may need barrierless access and a wheelchair. But if I'm still there, I'm glad to review what happened again. Okay, that about the entertainment section. How to store data? Well, the basis for storing data in home end user, smartphones, mobile phones, tablets, in the business environment like databases, data centers, in infrastructure, not to forget the surveillance systems, IoT and cloud, as 3 components. So we are storing on flash components, SSDs, we are storing on hard disk drives and still on tape. Well, tape is not that old, although we don't see it, but many of data has to be still stored on tape. We will see later why. Are there alternatives? I mean, we are talking about 20 exabyte and 20 petabyte. With this type of media, will there be alternatives? Well, industry is researching on alternatives. So one of R&D alternative is a quartz crystal. So it's kind of 5D encoding. It's extremely robust. A quartz of a coin can hold 360 terabyte of data. So quartz could be the technology for this 20 petabyte. And even more, if you take DNA, so DNA is probably the most efficient way of storing data. With that DNA, like it is in our bodies, basically every life is depending on that of this data storage. Well, if you do just the math, the current data space of mankind can fit in a trunk of a car, and is again extremely robust. If you don't kind of burn it, it will stay forever. So these are two potential technologies for 20 petabyte and 20 exabyte. But both of them are only for cold or frozen storage. You can write them, you can read them, but you cannot overwrite them. So if they ever come, they will come as a write-only technology. And if you think about that, the storage landscape in 20 or 40 years may look like you have a memory, you have a flash, you have a hard disk drive for your active storage, and then you have a huge chunk of archived storage that you only write and read, but never overwrite. But today, due to that reading, writing stuff, we are far away from being that as a product. So if we think about today and the near future, it will still be this hard disk drive versus SSD competition. And ask the question, will this SSD ever replace the hard disk drive? So predicting the future, what will happen, there were some interesting predictions that failed. In IBM 1943, they said there's a world market for 5 computers. Even in 1977, the president of Digital Equipment Corporation said there's no reason for any individual to have a computer in his home. And in 2012, Linus Torvald, the inventor of Linux, said rotating storage is going the way of the dodo. We are 10 years later, rotating storage is still there. And these guys, what they did not consider is the driving factors and the constraints. They had just their ideas, were caught in their business. I mean, Linus Torvald said a lot of stupid things every day. But they were caught in their business. So if we want to predict what's coming, let's look at driving factors and constraints. And one of the driving factors, the most important driving factor is always cost. Yeah? So maybe I can show like this. I take an analog laser pointer. So the cost per capacity of the SSD is around $100 per terabyte, and about HDD is about $15 to $12 per terabyte, and tape is even lower. And it has been always like this for the last years, and it's also predicted to be like this for the next years. So you can see the cost per capacity, which is a very important factor for storing a lot of data, is running on parallel curves. And parallel curves meet never. That we learned in 6th class math. So for a long, long time now, but also in the future, the cost of tape and hard disk drive will be an order of magnitude lower than the flash components. And this is why, as cost is important, we will stay with them. The other factor is just the manufacturing capacity. How much storage mankind can manufacture? Well, we need a lot of storage, that's for sure. But if you look at, for example, 2021, we had about almost 1,000 exabytes in hard disk drives, enterprise hard disk drives, and just 150 exabytes in SSDs. And if you look at the total, even the client ones, then it's 1,300 exabytes in hard disk drives and just 336 exabytes in SSDs. So 80 to 90% of today's data is still stored on hard disk drives. As there's a price difference of 7 to 10, the business is more or less the same of flash components and hard disk drives because the hard disk drives are so cheap. But the majority of the data still goes to hard disk drives, and it will have to go for some more years. Why is that? You know, if we compare the three technologies, tape, hard disk drive, and SSDs, in the sequential speed they are equal. So whenever it's about sequential speed, data coming as a long row of data for recording or streaming, there's not much of a difference, not an order of magnitude. As for random speed, there's an order of magnitude difference. So if it is random, if it is active storage, if you have to work on that, 1 IOPS for the tape, no way. You cannot use tape as an active storage. Hard disk drive with 300 IO operations per second, yes or no. If you have many hard disk drive and combine them together, it will work, but it can still not compete against the SSDs with 1 million of an IOPS. So for everything where the random performance is required, obviously it will go to SSDs. And then there's the cost factor. Order of magnitude again between, and if it is kind of a lot of data, if cost is important, hard disk drive or even tape plays the role. So if you look at the applications, MP3 player and mobile phone, of course no hard disk drive. Now, in the past, we had hard disk drives. This one is a hard disk drive that was used for the first version of the mobile phone. So the first Nokia mobile phone had a 4 gigabyte spinning disks manufactured by Toshiba. Of course, soon this was replaced by flash, obviously, because of the mechanics, because of the robustness, and flash components were cheaper in that scale. We see this with laptops, notebooks, and desktop PCs today. Yeah, they are carried around, and the hard disk drive is an issue with mechanical robustness, but also with the scaling. We have 20 terabytes of hard disk drive, and we need 256 gigabyte of memory in the laptop. That's better done with SSDs. The home NAS. It's maybe the last thing around us where we will see the hard disk drives in a personal use. In the home NAS you have, what, 4, 8, 10, 12 terabytes. That's too expensive for SSDs, so you will have the hard disk drives there for a while. Enterprise NAS as well, enterprise server. Not that much of storage, but it should be fast, so that's going to NVMe SSDs and so on. The storage and backup in enterprise stays with hard disk drive, same as cloud. Surveillance storage will stay with hard disk drives because their IOPS, the agility does not matter too much. It's a sequential stream that you record, and there the hard disk drives are just a little slower than the SSDs, but 7 to 10 times more expensive. Industrial storage as well. Where is, oh, we lost it. Anyway, so we in Toshiba and basically the industry is seeing a coexistence of hard disk drives and SSDs for the next 10 years and beyond. And after 10 years, I hope I'll retire, and then I don't mind anymore. Well, back to actual business, back to Toshiba. As you see, in 2022, we have launched a 20 terabyte. Next year, we are planning a 26 terabyte with some kind of archiving option, and the normal standard HDD will be at 22, then 24, then 28, then 30 something. So they're not major advances, but one important thing is here is for us as an industry, let's say the new 20 terabyte. Yeah, it's a great leap. First time we have 20 terabyte. But important is that we manufacture it for the same cost as the previous 18. If it was double the cost and double the price, no one would buy a 20 terabyte. They all would go with 18. So what will have to happen for the hard disk drives in the future? Always higher capacity, but always at the same cost. As long as we as an industry can achieve this, then hard disk drives will stay alive. if we cannot achieve, and I mean, demand for high capacity is there, but if it would be too expensive, if hard disk drives would become ways more expensive, then other technologies will take over and emerge. And what we can see is that up to 40 terabytes, we have the technology available. We have cheap technology available where we can say a 40 terabyte hard disk drive in 2026, 2027 will cost a few $100s. So that's confirmed for this decade. The technologies for the next decade are in R&D and also confirmed as a technology. But at the moment, we are not yet sure we can manufacture them for a low cost and a high scale. So there we will have to see, but if we achieve this, we will have a 100 terabyte hard disk drive in the 2030s. Technologies for a 20 petabyte hard disk drives are not yet there. But back in '84, no one thought about 20 gigabyte or 20 terabyte as well. So that does not mean anything. It's up to see. We will see. Thanks for the attention.